This time, we salute the brilliance and bravado of Muhammad Ali, the innovation of Indira Gandhi, the genius of Alfred Hitchcock, the beauty and staying power of Elizabeth Taylor, and the resilience of Nelson Mandela. India's first female prime minister was born into the influential Nehru Dynasty in November 1917. Her father had risen under the mentorship of Mahatma Gandhi to become the first prime minister of independent India in 1947. Starting out in politics as her father's personal assistant, she was elected president of the Indian National Congress in 1960. But it wasn't until her father's death in 1964 that she joined the government as Minister for Information and Broadcasting. She immediately impressed Prime Minister Lal Shastri by soothing community leaders and supervising reconstruction of parts of Madras that had been destroyed by rioting. A year later, Shastri died of a heart attack after signing a peace agreement with Pakistan. With the backing of the syndicate, who believed she would be easily led, she defeated Morarji Desai to become India's 5th Prime Minister. Proving she was no puppet prime minister, Indira became a leader in the so-called Green Revolution, instituting government support for innovative agricultural programs like plant breeding, irrigation development, and financing of agrochemicals to improve the lot of the rural poor.
This is naturally an important conference. Its discussions are aimed at the removal of poverty, so that the vast millions of Asia are enabled to lead the kind of life which in our times is regarded as man's basic right. Asia today means these disinherited millions, whether they live in the desert, the jungle, or the crowded deltas. But Asia did not always suggest want and penury. It is the home of many civilizations and all the great religions. Could these civilizations have grown if they had not been held together by adequate technological mastery? The early Indians, the early Chinese, the Arabs, to name only a few of the great people of this continent, made notable discoveries in medicine and mathematics, in astronomy and architecture, in metallurgy and agronomy.
Her Congress party adopted the slogan, "Abolish Poverty." And while the radical programs initially resulted in chronic food shortages, by the early 70s, the country was beginning to see surplus production of wheat, rice, and cotton. India became a food exporter and diversified its commercial crop production. At the same time, Gandhi pushed for an expansion in the production of milk to help combat the serious issue of malnutrition in children. Labeled food security, these radical initiatives curried favor with the country's rural and urban poor. And while the good times lasted, she was hailed as a heroine. Because of India's continued trouble with Pakistan over the disputed territory of Kashmir, Gandhi made national security and foreign policy another top priority, accelerating the country's nuclear program. And in 1974, the first underground nuclear test was conducted near the village of Pokhran in Rajasthan, catapulting India into the nuclear arms race. But by 1975, the Green Revolution had all but collapsed, with a mere fraction of allocated funds reaching the most needy, thanks to poor administration, corruption, and greed at the state and national levels. Gandhi's authoritarian regime, which had stripped powers from the states, had won her many political enemies, while the growing influence of her chief advisor and youngest son, Sanjay Gandhi, also led to resentment among elected officials. After the High Court found her guilty of a minor infraction during her 1971 election campaign, her opposition rallied and called for her resignation. Strikes and protests threatened to paralyze the states, but instead of standing down, Gandhi called on President Ali Ahmed to call a state of emergency. President's rule remained in place for 19 months, and Gandhi took advantage of the police state to imprison thousands of dissenters and clear the slums of Delhi, leaving hundreds of thousands of people dead or homeless. Not surprisingly, she lost the election of 1977, after which she and Sanjay were arrested and tried on several charges that didn't stick. Ironically, the long-running trial won her great sympathy, and in 1980, she was back in power with a landslide majority. Six months later, Sanjay was killed in an air crash, and Indira persuaded her reluctant older son, Rajiv, to enter politics and began grooming him as her successor. Despite her huge majority, the bumpy ride continued with Sikh insurgents attempting to overthrow her. On October the 31st, 1984, 3 months after quelling an insurgent plot, on her way to an interview with British actor Peter Ustinov, she was gunned down by 2 of her own bodyguards, who were immediately shot by other members of her security team. She died on the way to hospital, where doctors reportedly removed 31 bullets from her body. After lying in state, she was cremated on November the 3rd. Amid widespread sectarian unrest, she was succeeded as Prime Minister by Rajiv, who was himself assassinated in May 1991.